Well, good morning. How are we doing today? Thank you for coming. I recognize a lot of faces from this semester and last semester. I appreciate you coming out. What I want to do is talk to you a little bit about communication. For me, though, I want to give you a little context on my background. And for many of you, this goes back to before you were born, okay? Myself and Mark, we've been friends since the 4th grade. In high school, I want you to think about what was going on with us in high school. I was a sophomore. You guys heard Michael Jackson earlier, Beat It. The song was just on. It brings me back to high school. I was a sophomore when Michael Jackson first moonwalked across the stage. I was like, man, how can a man move that way? And hearing that song brings you back to the time, right? Well, that's what was going on kind of culturally. In the early 90s, I graduated college with my undergrad. I had a marketing and a management degree. And back then, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't even know how miserable we'd be without cell phones. You know? Now you lose your cell phone or you break it, it freaks you out for a day. We didn't even know how miserable we'd be without cell phones. When I graduated in 92, you had to look for your job in the newspaper, all right? You had to go find the classifieds to find a job. And back then, you still needed a degree for most of the good jobs, but the number one thing that employers looked for back then was excellent communication skills. That was the number one thing. Since then, a lot has changed, right? Technology, the internet, the cloud, a lot's changed. And I want to give you some statistics. I do a little bit of research before these presentations like I require my students to do. There's 3.5 billion searches on Google every day. 3.5 billion questions being asked on Google. That's about 100 billion per month. When I read that out loud and say that out loud, I think, who in the world used to answer all these questions everybody had? I don't know. There's over 1.25 billion users on Facebook today. All of those users, if you add them up, Facebook would be the 3rd largest nation in the world, behind China and the United States. That's amazing, right? Data is where the money's at now. Data is where the money's at. A lot of you guys on your cell phone, you've got the little app called WhatsApp, right? I do too. I've used it. Well, that app just sold, the owners of that app just sold that company for $19 billion with a B. $19 billion. Not because it was highly profitable. The value of that company was they had collected data on people like you and me, and that's where the money is. It's collecting this data. Think about this. The U.S. Department of Labor, all of you students, they're predicting by the time you're 38, you will have had 14 different jobs. 14 different jobs. I look at my dad sitting in the front row. I can always count on him. He would show up if nobody else did. My dad worked for IBM for 20-some years. The business culture is not like that anymore. It's not like that. You're going to work for a lot of different companies with a lot of changing technologies. 8 out of the 10 in-demand jobs of today, the fastest growing jobs, they didn't exist 10 years ago. The jobs themselves did not exist 10 years ago. The technology that you're using on the job didn't exist 10 years ago. And in a few years when you graduate, you're going to be using technology that doesn't exist today. So what does that mean? That means we're training you to compete for jobs that don't exist today. It's kind of scary, right? We also ask you at an early age, 19, 20, to give us your degree, your major. We ask you to specialize. And you're 19, 20 years old. We ask you to specialize. Well, let me tell you something. I mentioned something earlier in the conversation. I mentioned that when I graduated college in 92, excellent communication skills was the number one thing that employers were looking for. despite all the changes in technology, it is still the number one job description that employers post. That is what they look for when they hire you. Can you communicate well? Can you speak well? Can you write well? That is what employers are looking for today, despite all the changes in technology. And that's what we teach here at Broward College in a lot of the required courses. That's what we teach. Now, let me give you an example that is a little closer to home. Actually, go back 7 or 8 years. You guys, most of you were born during this example. A lot of you were probably in elementary school or middle school. And for me, when I name a year, I have to know what was going on at that year. 2007, we were in 2 wars. We were in Iraq and Afghanistan. The mortgage crisis was going on. The stock market was plummeting. We were losing thousands and thousands of jobs every day. President Bush, he was near the end of his term, and there was a name floating out there that was generating a lot of excitement. And think about this name, first of all. Barack Hussein Obama. Think about the first time you heard that name, right? A man of color running for president with the name Barack Hussein Obama. I remember hearing the name. I remember hearing all the excitement surrounding him. I wanted to hear what he had to say. I wanted to hear how he could move people. This is the question I'm asking you, and I want you to think about this. What do you think would have happened if, when he stepped up to the mic, essentially in front of a camera, getting into the living rooms of every American, what do you think would have happened if he didn't speak with eloquence, with intelligence, with passion, using voice inflection, tone, pitch, nonverbals? He wouldn't have gotten the most important job in the United States, possibly in the world. He would not have gotten the job. And I know that's a pretty broad example, but I'm telling you, I've lived this. Before, I've been teaching here a couple years, teaching before that at FAU. I was in the real world. People get hired because they speak well. They get a good degree, they speak well in an interview, they get promoted because they communicate well. Excellent communications, to me, those words don't do it justice. You have to understand how to persuade. You have to understand how to inspire. You have to understand how to get people to follow you, how to manage people, to get them on your team. So I'm passionate about that. Obviously, I'm passionate about it. And I'm not passionate about it because I teach it. It's the exact opposite. I teach it because I'm passionate about it. I chose to teach this because I know how important it is. All right. Well, enough about me, all right? We've got 3 speakers here, and I'm not going to tell you a lot about their successful companies. I'm not going to tell you a lot about them. I'm going to introduce them individually and tell you a little bit about them as I introduce them. But I want to tell you a couple things, and I figured out the best way to tell you is really what they're not. What they're not. First of all, they're not paid speakers, all right? They don't travel around and speak for a living. Not at all. They went to work this morning, they came here to speak, and they're going back to work when they leave here. Going back to challenges, struggles, problems, failures, and successes. That's real life. So what they have to tell you today is real life, okay? And also, more importantly, what they're not. They did not inherit their company. It wasn't given to them. I respect every CEO, I respect every president of every company because I know what's involved in that job. But, you know, people like Donald Trump or people like that I respect them, of course, but they're born into it. They were born into it, right? Really, all they could have done is screwed it up, really. And I don't think many of us here are about to inherit a profitable company anytime soon, right? So I wanted to get people in front of you that have sat exactly where you're sitting, all right, that have the struggles that you're struggling with. And I've got 3 of them right now.